Welcome back to the 16th episode of the Diving Into Sports podcast with your hosts Lyle
and Nash.
Henry. Let's dive into today's topic. Tom Allen fired a day after the Hoosiers lost to the Boilermakers in very rough fashion. I mean, they had the lead
by 10
for a lot of that game. They had the lead for a lot of that game, and they really should have won. And I believe it would have saved Allen's job if they would have won. They lost, and we saw how that went. Tom was on the Hoosiers coaching staff since 2017 and finished with a 33-49 record as the head coach, which isn't good enough. It isn't good enough for a Big Ten team. It just isn't. Your expectations are extremely high when you're a college football coach, but especially for a Power 5 school, and you just have to do better than that. And we lost our final 3 games, and 9-26 overall and 3-24 in Big Ten play since the 2020 season. That's horrible. It's been really bad lately.
Yeah, the tricky part is, though, you can't argue that he's a bad person. I mean, he stands with the great mantra, LEO, love each other, but the problem is there have been no wins, no big wins at least, along with that last few years. I mean, they've only won 3 Big Ten games over the last 3 years. That's just not going to cut it when you're at this high level with the Pac-12 teams joining next year. You can't keep a coach around that's producing that atmosphere, so you've obviously got to mix it up. But now you're in a situation where it's a nationwide search for the first time in a long time for a big program, and there are not obviously a ton of big names available, but some that could be appealing to IU, and we will be interested for who they go for.
Yeah, immediately the rumors start swirling after a coach gets fired, and obviously there's a lot of IU fans, so the questions start coming into play. Who's it going to be? There's a lot of options, and the search is wide, and they're saying it starts immediately, so
I would guess they want to hire someone in the next couple of weeks, too, especially with guys entering the transfer portal. They want to get things sorted out as quick as they can. So obviously this is huge for the future of IU football and the sports program there in general, because it will really solidify the fact on how good they will be going forward and what kinds of players they will have next year.
Yeah, and as Nash touched on, the Big Ten is expanding. I mean, IU plays at UCLA next year. There's going to be some big bumps and bruises, and I don't expect us to be better even if we got a great head coach, because it's going to get really tough. But the way you get better is by having a good coach, and Tom Allen hasn't proved himself at all lately.
Let me just get into something quickly before we go into the possible candidates. I think something that was important that Tom Allen touched on in his kind of final shot before he got fired, I saw, he touched on the fact that IU has not really implemented the NIL deals as much in football as much as they have in basketball, and he wanted that to be more of a thing going forward in the Indiana University athletic program. So he touched on the fact that NIL should be incorporated more, which I agree. I think it's a changing sport, and you've got to cope with the times. You can't live in the past when you've got Michigan, Ohio State, and everyone else in this Big Ten, big conference going ahead of you. You've got to step to the times and do as much as you can to stay up there with those big dogs.
Yeah, and even though we've had a really bad program lately, it doesn't mean it has to stay that way. And you want to give the fan base all you can. So you have to make changes. You have to deal with changes, and even though they might be tough to swallow, and a lot of people probably do like Tom Allen, I think most people were pretty happy with this decision to let him go. So now we'll move into some of the candidates being mentioned, and there's a lot of good ones, I will say. There's a lot of good candidates for this head coaching role, and I'm going to read off of Indy Star because they've got a good list here. Go slow. Jason Candle from Toledo, their head coach.
Probably the name being thrown around the most, in my opinion.
And we'll touch on each of these more individually in a minute, but I'm just reading the list here. Chris Creighton, Eastern Michigan head coach. Paul Christ, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. I could be wrong, though. former head coach at Wisconsin. Everyone probably remembers him. He
runs a very, very slow offense. Not a super fun offense to watch at all, but he's gotten the job done in the Big Ten before, so you've got to look for experience like that. But let's just rewind. I just want to touch on Jason Candle a little bit. He's been the name probably thrown around the most in the search so far, in my opinion. Very impressive resume. He's won more than 60 games across the past 9 seasons with Toledo there in Ohio. Very impressive. He steered the Rockets to multiple conference titles and a half dozen bowl games. Very impressive. Something IU would love to have. Even just making the bowl games is an accomplishment. So 4 Power 5 upsets as well for Toledo in that tenure with Candle. He's a guy that he's proved to get it done even on the big stage. So that I'd be happy with that hire. But there are also other names, similar big resumes that we'll get into.
Yeah, Creighton, Christ, and Candle. Candle's by far the best in my opinion. Then we go to Willie Fritz, Tulane head coach. Tulane has been rolling lately, and coaching plays a big factor into how well you're doing, so that could be a good hire.
Yeah, just like Creighton, who we mentioned earlier, he started off in the Division II level, Willie Fritz, and now he's grown up to Tulane, who's been a huge contender. They played in the Cotton Bowl last year. Very, very good team. Had multiple NFL prospects over the past few years. So, yeah.
Dan Mullen, former head coach at Mississippi State and Florida. He's a very interesting guy. I don't know if he's going to want to take on this rebuild, but he's a very experienced coach. You either love him or you hate him, really. But
yeah, in my opinion at least, I'm going to say that he is my favorite possibility for this job. Probably my favorite name being thrown around. Definitely a wild card, but he checks off almost every box IU would want. He's got experience, 13 years as a head coach at Mississippi State in Florida, 103-61 record, lots of wins in big games. He made it to a bowl game in all but his first and last seasons as a head coach. So 11 out of his 13 years as a head coach, he's been to a bowl game. Very big stats. 7 of those were victories. He finished in the top 25 in the AP poll the last 6 years. I mean, there is a lot of cred to his name. Dan Mullen would obviously be a huge hire for IU, but the question, like Lyle said, was, will he want to come here? I'm not sure. He already passed on the possible job at Syracuse, so, he might want to stay with ESPN. That's where he is now, so you wonder there, what are his goals?
Yeah, so I'm going to skip over a few names now and head down to the more juicier names on the list.
Some more wild cards.
And some better options, in my opinion. We've heard a lot of people mentioning Barry Odom at UNLV. He's got a good program going there.
He's a legitimate option.
Used to be on Missouri's coaching staff, and yeah, he'd be a good option. And then Kane Womack. This either is a big possibility or a very small possibility. If you remember, he used to be our defensive coordinator, has now been at South Alabama, being their head coach since. He could come back and just take this team in as his own if he gets that opportunity. That would be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that would be very interesting, but there are many wild cards out there, and I don't think Womack is going to get the job, though, because I don't think we can live in the past like that. I don't think we can turn back the page and go back to that Tom Allen era. So in my opinion, we have to move forward. Some other wild cards out there include probably the biggest fan favorite around here is Antoine Randall. I mean, just one of the best IU football players of all time, former Pittsburgh Steeler, threw a touchdown in the Super Bowl, played multiple sports at IU, very impressive guy. And now currently the Lions wide receiver coach in the NFL. The question is, will he want to go from there to college? Because the Lions obviously a lot of success right now, except for that Thanksgiving loss. But you know what? I'm not sure he will want to come down, but he is getting an interview with IU, we heard. So he's definitely a real possibility. As crazy as it might sound, he might be the next IU football coach, especially if he could get some good assistance with him. Antoine Randall is a real possibility and a guy that I think a lot of people would like to be at that leadership role.
Yeah. There's a lot of people with ties to IU who you might want as your coach. And there's options. So along with Randall L, there's names like Mike Hart, running backs coach at Michigan. I believe he's the one that fainted.
He
here
did
last
year at Memorial Stadium. The assistant for Michigan. He's a good assistant though. That would be a solid hire. But I don't see it happening. I think he'll want to stay with Michigan, especially if they keep Harbaugh.
Well, anyway, Hart attended Indiana, so there's that. I mean, he might want to lead his alma mater.
Definitely, though, the biggest wild card thrown around so far has been John Gruden. I'm sure everyone listening to this knows the name. One of the biggest football names around, the Gruden family, full of history. I mean, he grew up in Bloomington.
He went to Binford Elementary, actually. Yeah. So John Gruden, he's coached in the NFL. He could be a viable option, except you look at his past and he got fired from the NFL for some bad reasons. He's not a great guy. Good football coach, though. So
big wild card, though, and I don't see that happening just because it's such a wild card that I don't think they're going to go way out there on that big of a limb. And then the only other coach with really no head coaching experience that has a shot and worth a mention is Justin Fry, who is the Ohio State associate head coach. He's a guy that definitely could get hired, but he is also happy at Ohio State right now, especially because they've had a lot of success, but they lost to Michigan. So you never know if he will want to leave, but I don't see him as one of the major options. But he is an option, and he doesn't have any head coaching experience.
Yeah, so those are some of the best options, I think, the best options we have. To me, strictly coaching-wise, my favorite options are Jason Candle, Antoine Randall L. Probably, I might have to say Mike Hart and John Gruden. Those are my top four for who I'd be most happy with.
Well, if you're going with me, I'd go Dan Mullen, Jason Candle, and then I think Randall L could bring good atmosphere, so I'd be happy to see him get hired. But also Mike Hart, I think I would like that too. So definitely a lot of names swirling around. If they could go for a guy like Dan Mullen, though, that would be crazy because a lot of experience there. Other guys like Lane Kiffin, some big names that could get hired, but very, very powerful names that might not want to come to IU, but you never know. Going to be a very interesting search. Obviously, a big week for IU fans as Tom Allen goes out. Huge buyout. They're going to pay him over $15 million just to leave. So really big news in college football, and especially for IU. It's going to be interesting to see how the future unfolds for the Hoosiers football program, but we will keep you updated, and hopefully there's a decision made sooner rather than later.
We'll see you in the next one.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, you can listen to Diving into Sports on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, CastBox, Pocket Casts, and Stitcher. We'd love it if you could follow us on all of those platforms. And check out our Twitter account. Our handle is @NashAndLyle.
By the way, we're now available on Google Podcasts as well.